become so disconnected with myself. And that was the source of my loneliness. Nothing is worse than feeling lonely when you're surrounded by people, or feeling lonely when you're in a relationship.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. This is me, your host, Mike Campbell, and today I'm bringing you a wonderful and special guest, a friend of mine, a client in the past, and now someone who I work with as a colleague, and that is Mr. Phil McAuliffe. Phil is someone who, I came across via the internet, via this dude who I noticed was popping up on quite a few of my posts that I was making. I think this is probably Facebook at the time, back 5 or so years ago now, interacting, liking a lot of things. And then it was a time at which I was starting my new coaching program, the School of Personal Mastery, which has now evolved into the Everyday Legends Academy, which sits under the umbrella of my major school, the School of Personal Mastery. Phil started the program, or at least I was starting it, and there was this gentleman who was looking like he was both interested in my work and clearly resonating with it, with a need for it. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, it looks like you're interested in my stuff. Do you want to have a conversation about it? Now, what happens next for Phil is something that we explore in this episode. Spoiler, he joined the program. We did some monumental work together, and part of his life shifted monumentally from being married with children in Seoul, Korea, to being gay and living with a new partner in Wellington, New Zealand. There's a little bit in the middle there, and also that depends on and as a result of all of the stuff before it, and that's what we explore in this conversation, with one important through line, and that is loneliness. And that is a big part of Phil's story, and it's what we explore in this, and it is where a lot of his work now is. As a diplomat for many years, Phil left that work and started working for himself in creating The Lonely Diplomat. He wrote the book and he created a platform and service for breaking down the stigma and the massive elephant in the global diplomatic room that is loneliness, and pretending to be this version of who you think you need to be in order to get the job and get the next posting and perform and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot to it, and we've had many conversations about it over the years. And where that has taken him to is working with primarily gay men in around destigmatizing and supporting and creating connection around loneliness. So what I'm going to do for you and for Phil is I'm going to read his bio to give it the punch and poignancy that really he has for us. Phil is passionate about destigmatizing loneliness and creating a safe space for people to authentically connect with themselves, those people around them, and their communities. Loneliness, especially chronic loneliness, is an awful feeling. Phil's battled and continues to battle at times feelings of loneliness and knows how wretched and unworthy it can make us feel. Loneliness is a part of the human condition. But there's such stigma in admitting our loneliness that we often deny the thoughts and feelings that come with loneliness and hope they'll just go away. They don't. Phil tried that. The antidote to loneliness is connection. We need connection for our mental, emotional, and physical wellness. But connection, authentic connection, is hard work, especially when we're all so busy or we don't even know how to connect with each other. With love and curiosity, Phil uses his story and life observances to show a way for you to begin the journey back to real, authentic connection that you need and deserve. You can find Phil's blogs and podcasts at thelonelinessguy.com and thelonelydiplomat.com, Instagram, Facebook, etc. We'll put all those links with this episode and the show notes. Now, I said colleague. So fast forward, Phil being someone who goes through my program, does some phenomenal work, really steps out into being himself and working with others in and around loneliness. And then as a one of the first graduates of my program now, he and I run a mastermind for graduates of the program, and it's so beautiful to have him in my corner and working with him on that. And he's also a coach in my program, the Everyday Legends Academy, and he brings so much insight and compassion and loving invitation for the men who join my program, and it is my absolute honor to have Phil on the podcast. So, to learn all about loneliness and Phil's story from Seoul to Wellington, as I just described, let's get into the show. Phil McAuliffe, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's awesome to be here.
It's a joy to have you here. Now, we have some history that goes back a few years, and it's one of those situations consistently when people come onto the podcast. Some people might know you, some might not. So I'm going to fire into let's get to know Phil a little bit with a question that you're very familiar with, and you, of course, can take it wherever you want. And that is, who the hell is Phil McAuliffe?
Oh, well, how long have we got? Asking that question, Mike, right off the bat, it's like saying someone like to a comedian, I've heard that you're really funny, say something funny. And of course, anyone, you just have nothing to say at that point.
What does the answer sound like today?
Well, the answer sounds like I'm cold, but beyond the mere physical expression of myself right now. There's some big words for so early in the podcast, but so I'm Phil. I'm Australian, and I'm like a study in contradictions, and I'm just this what I'm learning about myself over the last few years working with you. But also being a student of my own life is that I'm just this awesome enigma of humanity, and with a whole lot of curiosity, a whole lot of sort of self-care and stuff. I'm loving the exploration of who I am and the expression of who I am and allowing myself to be who I am and who I will become. But yeah, I mean, I could go, into some stats, but that
height, mate.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, you said an enigma of humanity, and I love that term. And, I'm assuming this is where the contradiction piece comes in as well, which I'd love to explore. Okay. Well, let's go there. When you see yourself as a potentially a series of contradictions, what does that look like? What does that speak to?
Well, I guess I am, an ambivert. So there's some things I'm gonna be honest with you. A few minutes before sitting down and dialing, into this chat, I'm like, oh God, this is going to be, just feeling like resistance within myself. Yeah. And now that I'm in it, I'm I'm here. I'm showing up as me. And I know that, this will be this soul nourishing conversation, but I find this happens all the time within me. I have to overcome the introverted part of myself. Not overcome, but work within the introverted part of myself. And then, once I'm allow myself to be where I am and to show up how I am in that moment, then, I'm allowing myself the other parts of me to be. It sounds like I've got some kind of, whole riot of people up in my head and in my body but I do. I have, I can present very confidently, use, and with eloquence, and, I can, speak on a whole lot of different topics out of interest. But, within me, there's a lot of, internal negativity, internal, working with, as we say in your work, Mike, our villains. And some of my villains are very powerful behavioral drivers in me, both positively and adverse, negative. I was avoiding saying negative, but I said it anyway. Behavioral drivers, and it's those, particularly about how I relate to the world, that can hold me back.
Yeah, right. And so when you say ambivert, you're speaking to, there's this element that is introverted and wanting to just kind of maybe not have the conversation and just be in your own space. But then there's also the side of it when you get into it, be it, something that you have to potentially wrestle with a little bit or have a conversation with internally, or whatever the case may be, boom, you're away laughing. I enjoy this connection. I enjoy this kind of conversation. Hence that almost contradiction sounding thing. Yeah.
And when I find myself having a chat with someone or a chat connecting, however the connection is, and I'm both allowing myself to be and allowing being pulled and pushed by purpose, by passion and purpose, that to me, is it's everything. It's what I've learned is what can get me past those kind of and I'm not going to lie, like the reluctance that I was feeling, just thinking about it now, and it feels right, is that the topic that we're going to have a chat about. It calls me to share my story. And every time that I share my story, like, okay. And I don't want it to not be something that I have to work up, because otherwise it comes across as, sort of academic. And removing that kind of that lived experience and the passion that comes from the lived experience and the sharing of a story and the connection of the story and the real vulnerability and authenticity, and the connection that comes from being vulnerable and authentic, is the stuff of life for me right now, and has been for a little while. But still, when I'm speaking on my own podcast, speaking, on other people's podcasts, and, they're like, just like Mike Campbell just did, like, tell us about you. Who are you? It's like, okay, I have to put myself out there, and that takes courage. And there's a process within myself that I have to go through, knowing that the topic of loneliness is so abhorrent, and we're so conditioned, both within ourselves and society, to avoid it. Like, I still have to wrestle within myself to go, no, like, this is like what you love to do. This is how you are affecting change, putting you into the world, is through your story and sharing your story. But I don't want it to ever become an academic exercise. But still, there's I have to go through the shakes. I have to go through the doubt. I have to go through the taking big deep breaths and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, take a quick deep breath. Let's explore that, Phil. I'm getting right. There's these you're coming on to have a conversation. I've just thrown a completely, potentially huge open-ended question. Who the hell are you? And that's what we're here to explore is who is Phil and your story. That word loneliness has popped up, and I suggest or suspect we're certainly going to talk about that. And I'm getting here, you said, like, when I come on to speak about who I am and to tell a bit of a story, it can be a challenge. It can be a little bit of an internal battle with myself. And I suspect that might be part of the story. So tell us, in the past, has it always been there? Would you not have stepped into the story? And maybe you want to start here. How, therefore, did you end up here in the Phil that is, currently in front of me?
I have, I guess, this really good question. How did I get to be where I am now? I mentioned before the curiosity, and I guess it's hard to know like where exactly to tell the story. Like, like where does the story start? Does it start, growing up in a small country town in regional New South Wales and never quite fitting in? Does it start at the point where, I went to high school and it was a Catholic boarding school? So single sex boarding, but co-ed day school. And went there for 6 years, was like 4 hours drive from home, and, didn't quite fit in. And never quite fit in and battled to fit in during that time. Does it start at university, where I did sort of start to fit in, but not really fit in, and would go to, like, I went to, a university that you have to be pretty smart to get into, right? But the language there that I just used, Mike, like, I didn't say that I'm smart. Like, I was surrounded by smart people.
Yes.
I was surrounded, and so would spend like tutorials quite like just in this like seemingly eternal battle within myself, like going, ooh, like I want to say that seems like to be like a positive contribution to make to this small chat. But I'm like, well, no, it's probably wrong. No, don't say it. And then someone else would say it. And then people would be going, oh my God, that's like the smartest thing that anybody has ever said. Like, Nobel Prize for you. Like, you're awesome. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, they're smarter than me. And then I would say something would finally and like I'm an anxious sweater. Right? So I would just be like, I'd be sweating so much, and like be the middle of winter in Melbourne, and would be like so like anxious within myself, and I would summon the courage to speak up, and there'd be that awkward silence, and I feared the judgment that was in that awkward silence. And someone would go, like, generally, like, the lecturer or, the smart person in the class would go, yeah, that's our point. And then what I would hear is like, the grown-ups are now going to talk about this thing over here now, and you've just outed yourself as like not being worthy of being here, in my mind. But I say this because I'm still fearful of, but I really feared the judgment of that silence that comes after I say something. The judgment that came after I put myself out there.
Yeah.
And so I taught myself to say what was expected of me. And that started there. So I guess that's a good place to start, is, around that kind of late teen, early 20s time, where, surrounded by people who were amazing, had done amazing things already in their life, completely discounting the amazing things that I'd done within myself and lived in life, but allowed myself to be overawed by other people, and then would play that internal comparison game. And so in order to be to play that game, I thought I had to step up. I had to evolve, I had to change, I had to start to mold myself into a version of me that I thought everybody around me needed me to be. And that started, pretty much at high school, as it does for so many of us. But, at high school, like, I still remember the pivotal year was, 1991 when I was 14. And like I kind of started sort of maybe noticing that I felt kind of funny around other guys. But, Catholic boarding school, regional Victoria, early 90s, a whole lot of messages about, being gay. There was like the put downs, first of all.
Of course.
Common
language, right?
Yeah, common
That's
language.
Gay, what a homo. It's simple stuff. It's just part of the dialogue.
Like, I hate this word. I really hate it, but like, stop being such a fag. And, so I'm like, oh God, it's like the whole thing is like, what's going to give me away? Like, is it the way that, how does a straight guy look?
So
you're
nails? Saying there was a connection at that point to, I think I might be gay?
Yeah. And so it was like from then, like, how do I, like, that's bad. That's a bad part of me. How do I like distance myself from there and like throw other people off the scent? How do I throw myself off the scent?
Throw off the scent. Yeah, it's very apt.
Yeah, and but like, I try.
Look over here. Don't look at this hand. Look over here. Right? It's like an identity sleight of hand.
Exactly, and for so many people, full stop. For so many people, full stop. But particularly for gay men, or anyone who on the I guess the rainbow spectrum, initially, that whole, that sleight of hand, like, I'm deeply fearful of this part of myself, so I'm going to distract everybody around me by being like hyper masculine, hyper sporty, hyper whatever it is, like, because I fear this about me and I fear the judgment about me. So for me, like, spent almost 30 years fearful of my sexuality. And it wasn't until the work that you and I did together, and the tools that you taught me, Mike, that I started to use those within myself and started to mix that into the awesome mix of human contradictions within myself.
Yes.
And stirred the pot a bit and sort of went, okay, I'm going to allow myself to be me, and I'm going to put me into the world unashamedly, unreservedly, and know that I am worthy. Now, it sounds like awesome. If that just was like full stop. Thanks so much for coming, Phil. Like, this has been a great chat.
Well, there's a gap there, right? From university tutorials to sometime in the future. How many years between that? 20?
Yeah. I keep forgetting how old I am now. Yes. So, but yeah, so all the way through that time, through like the whole, playing the sleight of hand, like the internal roiling. And I'm just thinking aloud about this now. Like, the anxious sweating within myself was like the physical manifestation.
Yeah.
Of that kind of the roiling contradictions within myself. It's kind of like this whole theme that we're going with that we're developing now. It's like the contradictions, but yeah, getting.
Well, you spoke to this almost word that was, I suppose, at this stage connected to your identity before, which was this ambivert, and that's what I'm hearing there is like part of me slinks back here, and that might be a part that I've not wanted to present to the world, and then part of me's out there going, hey, it feels like there's the one hand under the blanket and the one hand out front, right? That has become part of you, but by the sound of it, part of the mechanism was that the hand that was more hidden, it carried a lot of shame and like all sorts of challenge and struggle internally around.
Yep. So there was like shame about not being, so finishing university, got a job, again, surrounded by awesome, smart, highly accomplished people. And then within that job, got to live and work overseas, surrounded by amazing, highly skilled, A-type personalities who, I call them, in my work in the Lonely Diplomat, chronic overachievers.
Mm-hmm. So you were a diplomat at this point.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't like the 14-year-old in the boarding school in regional Victoria, like the world was very small. I was the kid who like had head in books, would like I pored over atlases, pored over encyclopedias back in the day. I can get lost in Wikipedia now for hours, just like vacuuming up information. And I knew that there was a big wide world outside of my little corner of Australia. And I was desperate to get out into it, desperate to get and explore it. And so I'm like, oh, how can I do? Like, what can I do to go and see the world and, be paid for it? I'm like, well, there's the military. Like, I'm colorblind, so that like ruled me out. Plus, like, it's the military. I'm not very militaristic. Or diplomacy. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go try and be a diplomat. And so I did, and it was naturally, I did international relations at uni, loved it, like history and international politics, and just sort of loved it. Did well, and got into an organisation in the Australian government that sends people overseas, and I did it. And when I moved to Canberra, met an awesome woman, and despite sort of going, well, kind of sort of attracted to guys, but she's awesome. She's amazing, and felt seen and loved, and she was a diplomat as well, and so we went and lived in Venezuela for a couple of years in the early noughties. Came back to Canberra for a few years, moved to Darwin for a few years, and that's where our kids were born. From Darwin, moved to Ho Chi Minh City for 3 years for a job for me. And I remember, like, I just loved that job, loved it, and thinking, this is what I want to do. This is fantastic, and met great people, saw great things. Came back to Canberra for a few years, and then got another posting to Seoul, and we went and moved to Seoul, and I got to travel from Seoul to Tokyo. My job covered South Korea and Japan, so I got to travel like 20 times, and got to know Tokyo really well, and got to explore parts of Japan for work and on holidays and stuff, and Korea, and it was just amazing. It was amazing. But by that time, I was getting to my 40s, and I'm like, you know what? There's like, I'm feeling a void. Like, I'm doing all of this stuff, and I've got, very grateful for the apartment that the Australian government paid for, like 30th or 31st floor, overlooking 180-degree views of Seoul, and it was just amazing. It was it
sounds like something that the maybe not 14, but somewhere in there, the teenager off to university Phil, when he thought the world, going to see it and experiencing it, and how can I do that and get paid for it, might have been like ticking all the boxes, going, this is it.
Yep. And I was like, I had ticked the boxes, and I was like so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to do it a few times, right? But still, I would walk into conference rooms, and there'd be, the flag in front of me, my name, on the little, nameplate in front of me, and I'll be like saying things, and I'm like, I'm such a fraud. I'm still that, university kid who, was surrounded by smart people, who still feared the judgment, those silent beats of a conversation after I've said something, and I'm like, oh God, I've
So
said
despite
something
the
stupid
jobs
again.
and the placements and the experience, that same mechanism of internal thought, as was happening in early lectures and tutorials, is still running.
Yep. This constant tape running within myself, and it was exhausting. And then I started to notice, Mike, that I was feeling empty, feeling a void, and I didn't really know what it was. And I now know that this is so common.
Yeah.
And it's like, we can dismiss it as the midlife crisis. And we often do, right? But I'm like, oh God, I can't be the cliche. I'm turning 40 next birthday, can't be the cliche, but. And I sort of sat with it for a little bit, kind of wished it away, doubled down at work, exercise, my go-to numbing agents. And then I realized, I had this kind of epiphany moment where I realized that I had no one in my life. Well, it felt like I had no one in my life with whom I could pick up the phone beyond my wife, who was regularly in my life, who knew me, and I could call them, because, spending years moving place to place to place to place to place, you could, living that lifestyle, you could be friends with people but never see them again. You can, not see people for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And, when you catch up with someone after that period of time, the conversations never go beyond deep. They don't go deep.
Yeah, you've got to do all the catching up on the surface details, I suppose.
How's work? How's life? How are the kids? How's the house?
Yeah, where was the last posting? Tell us how the job was. Those things.
Yeah.
The easy things that rattle off, right? And they can
exactly
fill a space in a conversation very easily.
And they weren't cutting it anymore. They were not touching the sides of those conversations. But I had no one. Felt like I had no one who I could go beyond those conversations with and go, actually, I need to talk. I had plenty of friends, but no friends.
Yeah, and there's a distinction I heard you use there before. You said, I had no one. Well, I felt like I had no one. And that feels like a very important distinction.
Yeah. So then I get to the point in my life where I say these words. And I said these to my wife. I think I might be lonely. And she said, yeah, I've wondered about that. And I've heard it's really common. She's like, and you just go to work. I get to go play mahjong. I get to go and hang out with all these people and stuff, like swimming in connection. But you don't. And so we kind of try.
Even though you work with people and there are people around you a lot, right?
Yep. But it's work.
Yeah.
It's work, and it's competitive. It's a competitive environment. You were putting a very carefully cultivated version of yourself out into the world, and trying to have that pass as connection and being authentic and putting yourself out there. It's like, no, that's putting a version that I want you to see out into the world.
And are you describing, where you had got to in yourself, or are you more broadly perhaps describing the quite common life of a diplomat?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. At that point, most definitely both.
Yeah.
And so, my wife and I, went to workshop it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, when we met, like you liked swimming and you swam for a triathlon team and like, try swimming. I'm like, all right. So used the internet and found an English speaking, because it's in Korea, right?
Mm-hmm.
English speaking like swimming group. And I don't know if anyone else has gone swimming in Korea, but
I have not.
like, no. So I'm a big one. I'm a big one. Like as a swimmer, I'm a big one for like pool etiquette.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're not fast, please don't swim in the fast lane. And on judgment, know that I am judging you if you are swimming breaststroke. Unless you're an Olympic level swimmer swimming breaststroke in the fast lane, I'm going to be judging you. But so a swimming pool in Seoul is like Bondi on a hot day.
Right. Okay.
Right. And like you can't reach the edge of the pool because it's like this seething mass of humanity at either end of the pool. And so, but I swam. And I realized as I was swimming, I'm like, I'm not really talking to anyone because I'm swimming. And you can't talk underwater.
Perhaps if you're jogging, you can maybe be running and having a conversation, but that shit's not happening underwater.
No. And so anyway, like I went a couple of times and I'm like, okay, But then that didn't hit the spot. And I thought, okay, I actually need a bit of help. And by this stage, I'd read this awesome book by this guy, Mike Campbell. And like honestly, like I'd seen you in, I think it was Fitness First magazine or something like that I just sort of picked up and read an article about your book and your work. And so I got the book and, and some of the things that came to me about, putting myself out there, came from your book. And so at that time, I remember I sent you an email saying, this just happened to me on the subway on the way to work. And, I did this because something that you wrote came to mind. And I, just went and did it. So I want to say thanks, thanks, keep it up. And then like, I don't know, a few minutes later, I get an email back from you. And I'm like, first of all, thanks, but like, okay, like dialing that down now. But anyway, so that happened. But then, onto the loneliness thing, I called my employer's counseling line.
Mm-hmm.
And she was somewhere in Australia. I was in Korea. And this was a pivotal moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything after this happened. Like this was it. And I'm like, it takes a lot for me still after doing all of this work to ask for help. It takes so much to ask for help. But in a real moment, I called and I said, I think I might be lonely. And she's like, and I still remember this. I still remember the tone of the voice. And like when you are surrounded by the same Australian accents at work, like you kind of don't really hear it. And then like you watch TV or you speak to someone like a live person in Australia and you're just like, oh my God, your accent. Like, can you just bring your vowels together? But she's like, oh, you poor pet. Like, and I'm like, oh, that's not good. And I'm like, I remember thinking this very clearly. I don't want your pity.
Yeah.
I just want you to fix it. Like, it's taken me so much. Like, I now know this to be courage, to pick up the phone and to ask for help. And you going, oh, you poor thing. Nah, that didn't cut it. I just wanted you to go, well, you need to do this, that, and that.
Yes.
And lonely no more. And you're fixed.
Take my pain away, please.
Go with God, off you go. And anyway, I had a bit of a conversation, and it was one of those services that they kind of give you like an initial 10-minute conversation.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the conversation, she said the words that, you know, when I was Googling loneliness, were all over like the advice for loneliness, to not be alone. Then she's like, oh, well, you know, and you might know that I'm big on language, right? And she said the word that really is a red flag word for me is just, right? But she's like, you just got to put yourself out there. And I remember saying, well, out there is Korea. How's your Korean? And she's like, oh, well, you'll work it out. And she hung up.
Right.
And I'm like, I remember sitting back and like back in my chair and was like, that was not helpful. And so I Googled like loneliness and diplomats. Nothing.
Internet crickets.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like a couple of weeks later, I get approached from you. And I remember like going, like having a conversation with you, and you saw me. You saw me, and scarily, you saw straight through me. You saw straight through me. You saw straight through the bullshit, the facade that I had, you know, carefully constructed. And that scared the shit out of me. Because seeing into me saw, you know, you weren't distracted by the sleights of hand that I'd spent. Like, seriously, like it was fucking scary.
And also, you know, I coming in from that perspective, I don't have the history of the sleight of hand, right?
No.
So I have the beauty of seeing what's in front of me, if I can see it, of course, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I knew it was good for me. I knew it was medicine that I needed to move forward. Again, this is the inner contradictions in myself, the yin, the yang, the extrovert, the introvert.
Of course, yeah.
You know, like that common theme, like roiling massive human contradiction within myself. I knew that it was good for me, but I so desperately wanted someone to go, no, you can't do it. And so I went home to my wife that night, and she's like, how was your day, dear? And you know, I'm like, well, funny thing happened. Like this guy that I've been telling you about, you know, Mike, he actually called me. He's doing this thing, and he's got this program going, and you know, he's going to call back tomorrow wanting an answer. And like a whole lot of like unsaid things there in that conversation were about like, I need you to say no.
Yes.
So you could be the bad guy.
Please pick up the hesitation and fear in my voice.
And she didn't. She didn't. Awesomely, she didn't. And she just went like, you know, I actually think this is going to be real. We can make this work. I think this is going to be really good for you. I'm like, what? No, that was the wrong answer. But yeah, anyway, I signed up, but I knew that, no, didn't know it. I feared it, that I would unravel all of this carefully constructed projection of who I am was going to unravel.
And so what came with that fear for you? The unknown? Yeah,
definitely the unknown. And I'm like, part of it was like, you know, coming from my loneliness and the fear of being seen. And this is something that I really want to get into about loneliness specifically. I had become so disconnected with myself. And that was the source of my loneliness. And when we say, you know, nothing is worse than feeling lonely when you're surrounded by people, or feeling lonely when you're in a relationship, I had become so utterly disconnected with who I am that the 14-year-old would not have recognized me. Like the 4-year-old, the 6-year-old, whatever, like previous versions of me would not have recognized me, or would have like been judging me, going, who the hell are you? Like
where did we go?
Yeah. And so I've become like I feared within myself just as much as I feared other people judging me for what emerges after I take off my masks.
Yeah, who am I when I don't have this identity that I've felt safe with? Who am I when I don't have that, even though that identity and that persona has led me to where I am right now. It's like this devil I know, devil I don't situation, right?
And so this is the path for me, but I see it so often in my work, and Mike, I dare say you do too. The path of the people-pleasing nice guy. This is almost the inevitable conclusion of being the people-pleasing nice guy, is that utter disconnection with yourself, because you are constantly pleasing and perfecting and trying it again, knowing in the hope that someone sees you and goes, you know what, you're awesome. And you live for that external validation. I had completely disconnected with myself, that like no amount of external validation was ever going to touch the sides. I craved that external validation though. And
yeah, because what you're describing is, as you said, like someone will see me, but not me. They'll see who I've presented, and therefore it never touches the sides, right?
Yeah. So I had created a life, carefully curated life, for many good reasons, where I feared, like, still, like I'm shaking, like, and this is real. This is real, and this is where, like, how I approach my work on loneliness. The fear that comes with the coming out of the declaration within oneself that you're lonely. And then the work that needs to happen to take off the masks, to put our real, authentic selves, which sounds beautiful and romantic and poetic and inspiring and stuff, but fuck, it's hard. It's making small decisions day in, day out, whenever presented with an option of like, I need to be me in this moment.
And so when you say, there's the the coming out as myself, and the fear that might come with all of that, is that I am lonely. Is there something beyond that what I'm potentially getting is, if all of that stuff happens and therefore I'm outed as lonely, that means essentially there's something wrong with me?
Yeah. Yep.
Is that what was that conscious for you?
No, not conscious, but like felt. Conscious implying, mental awareness. But no, this was deep-seated, like almost core of my being, spiritual awareness. Because, and I know now why, having, done, a fair bit of work on loneliness. Loneliness is hardwired into us, because humans are social creatures. If you aren't part of the collective, you're at risk. And that's what loneliness is. Loneliness is that awful feeling where you are completely like susceptible to predators, being picked off. I'm desperately trying to avoid the saber-toothed tiger analogy, because it's always the saber-toothed tiger, right? But that loneliness is a feeling that invites us to go, I actually need to connect back, right? But within society, within ourselves, like, it's such a, like, the feeling of being a failed human being. I had made, and so many other people right now around the world, but gay men are choosing, and that's tough love, but choosing, just like I chose for years, to accept my loneliness as just part of life.
Mm.
And that was the price I had to pay. And I just want to let that settle in for a moment. Because that choice is one that is done out of fear.
Mm.
I have a choice now of putting my real, authentic self out there. However that is, however imperfect that is, however that opens that up for judgment.
Mm.
Or I could say the safe thing. I could express myself in a way that feels right to me, or I could play it safe.
Mm.
I could say the difficult things that could potentially affect my relationship with this person, or I could say the safe thing.
Mm.
And it's those constantly taking the safe options that little by little, in Spanish, it's poco a poco. I dolly stepped my way into my loneliness.
Mm.
It wasn't like a sudden plunge, like that happens after the death of a loved one.
Mm.
I waded from the shallow end in.
Yeah, and it's a slow retreat. Really what I'm hearing is like a slow retreat from yourself and who you are, right? And it's a slow, gradual process of self-abandonment to the point where, as you said, I don't recognize who I am. I have no connection to that, right? And the analogy that I've already jumped to is, you said it before, like, come out as who I am, but then of course that term coming out has obviously another very obvious connotation in terms of coming out of the closet. And closet or not, it certainly sounds like that's where you had put yourself, right? Like that slow retreat from who I am to a point where there's almost a door and maybe another couple of rooms away from who I am. Yeah. And so then that obviously takes us another step further, because at this point you were married to a woman and had a couple of sons, obviously. So there's another step in that literal coming out situation, right?
Yep. And I think that's exactly the right thing to say. It is the coming out of Phil. As Phil. Not as gay, not as lonely, but as Phil. This is what the process has been. But yeah, so at a couple of points through my life, like, and after going through your program and knowing that I would be okay, like, I started to speak up. I started to say things, and it was like, again, like dolly steps. And I would start speaking up, and not being the serial contrarian, but if I didn't agree with something, I would go, you know what, I don't agree, and here's why.
As opposed to biting your tongue, not saying the thing, hiding,
agreeing, because that was the safe option.
Yeah.
And so I started doing little bits of that.
It might not be that they like me for agreeing, but at least they won't dislike me, and that's safe.
Yep. But I thought, you know what? And this comes from the powerful understanding that I am enough, just as I am right now in this moment. And so other people can accept me, other people cannot accept me. I am enough right now. But prior to that, like, the thing that stopped me from being me was that if I took off all the masks, and I don't, like, I've got the image of like Get Smart, like the start of Get Smart, where like, there's like 20 doors.
All the doors, yeah.
Yeah, like taking off all these masks and stuff, finally getting into
there's another one. There's another one.
Yeah, and riddle me this, let's open sesame kind of stuff. But I so desperately feared that if I took all these masks off, that what was left was not going to be enough, was not going to be acceptable. was not, and all these people in my life, at home, at work, general public, had created their relationship with Phil McAuliffe, his masks.
Phil McAuliffe, diplomat.
The mask, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
it says this is who I am on my business card, all right? That's who I am.
Yep. Let me just hand that out like
Exactly.
a croupier at a casino.
Yes.
But yeah. And so when we talk about like the coming out, like as lonely, coming out as gay, coming out as whatever it is, like coming out as you are in that moment, that fear, it's so primal. It is primal that it stops us because we fear not being enough. And that's like present progressive tense. I still fear that. Right now, like in my mind, I'm like, you know, the listener, the viewer, you know, are they like connecting with this? Are they relating to this? Or are they going to go, God, he's full of shit. He's so full of, like, he had this charmed life and it was like, you know, oh, boo bloody who, like get a real problem and then let's talk about it. Like, nah. So, you know, whatever it is, I've got no control over that. I've got no control over how other people, you know, take what I'm saying right now. But the only thing that I have control over, as we know, Mike, are my words, thoughts, and actions. So I'm choosing right now to put me out there, knowing that there are men, there are people who are thinking and feeling that void and are scared of taking a step because of the fear of judgment. And the fear of judgment is not primarily from the fear of judgment from others. The thing that keeps us from taking a step when we kind of sort of maybe think that we might be lonely, or we, you know, in Instagram philosophy, you know, turning it around, it's like, you're not lonely, you just need more connection in your life. Bullshit, they're one and the same thing. I'm calling that out, right? It's one and the same thing. If you need more connection in your life, if you need more real, authentic connection in your life, you're lonely. You don't get to have the awesome, fun, real, authentic connection without wrestling with the loneliness first. And the wrestling with the loneliness first requires wrestling with the self-judgment. And that is terrifying because there is fewer worse things. Like there is no worse judgment than the judgment of self. Yeah. Because we are far harder. I'm an Olympic champion at being as hard on myself as, like, impossibly hard on myself. And other overachievers, A-type personalities, people who, you know, achieve great in life are often propelled by the same thing, the fear of self-judgment.
Yeah, and so the flip of that being something along the lines potentially of, if I am perfect or everything that I do is perfect, therefore I can't be judged, I will be acceptable, I will be approvable, right? Because there's this word that I'm really getting in what you're sharing, and that is acceptance. You know, what I hear in a point that you got to was you were able to accept yourself, come what may, out there in the world, if others accepted you or not. And that's part of that thing that we've created, you know, in all the stories and all the things that we've, you know, we go back to your story. And it's also very primal, as you said, right? Like being ostracized from your tribe in most of human history was a very, very unsafe and life-threatening thing. And so part of our work is obviously to tap into, like one, what connection and love can I actually look at and lean on and know is safe, and question and challenge that voice of rejection, of acceptance. Am I actually at threat here? Is my safety and my belonging at threat? And how potentially, and that's what I'm hearing in so much of your story, how am I living my life in order to seek the acceptance of others so that I can therefore accept myself?
Yeah.
And that just sounds like that's, as you said, that stepping back further away from myself. The more I do that, I'm chasing the acceptance of others, the further I'm actually stepping away from myself and self-acceptance. It has to come self-acceptance first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and I hate speaking like this. I really do, want to come up with other ways of doing it, but I call it Instagram philosophy. The like good vibes only.
Yes.
No, I think that does a disservice when it comes to loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to acceptance, critically, when it comes to feeling that you belong,
Mm-hmm.
it's imperative to look inwards first. And Mike, that I'm a huge fan of Dr. Brene Brown. She's my intellectual crush. And in about 2017, so it was autumn, so like September, October, and her book came out. I picked it up and I read it, read the first chapter. I kind of, said goodnight early, got into bed, and snuggled in and great, let's crack open this book and started reading it. And her first chapter on the book, Braving the Wilderness, changed my life. Another one of those I guess sliding door,
Mm-hmm.
red pill, blue pill moments.
Yes.
And
what was
and
it
this,
about that?
This talked about belonging, and I very deliberately I said that I went to primary school, tiny primary school in country New South Wales. Didn't really feel like I belonged.
Mm.
Went to boarding school, didn't feel like I belonged. University, didn't feel that I belonged. Went to work and didn't feel that I was worthy enough of being all these places in life. And Braving the Wilderness is all about the power of belonging. And the very first chapter, I'm not a crier, generally. But I remember reading the end of this first chapter and just going, what's happening here? Like, what's this stuff coming from my eyes? I'm leaking. And it talks about, Dr. Brown, she talks about how she struggled to belong and told multiple stories of her growing up. And she talks about how at college, when she was doing her undergrad, she, was introduced to the writings of Dr. Maya Angelou. And there was this quote, and that Dr. Angelou had said in the 70s during an interview, and Dr. Brown was like, nah, like you're full of shit. Respectfully, other work's great, but you're full of shit when it comes to this belonging. And then she tells this really powerful story of how she actually met Dr. Angelou in person. And the quote rings in my ears. And I so frequently stuff these things up. I've actually written it down. But
Beautiful.
This was everything to me when it came to being me in the world, whatever me entailed, including my sexuality. I'm not defined by my sexuality. I happen to be Phil, who's gay. Right? But this changed everything. You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. the price is high, the reward is great. That changed. Like, I'm shaking now for a different reason. I'm like so full of like passion that inspired like my first tattoo here to remind me to be me wherever I am in the world. And to be rooted in my contradictions, the yin, the yang, the light, the dark, the introvert, the extrovert, who I am. And I can say like the price is high, but the cure for loneliness is belonging, the feeling that you belong. And if you have spent a life being a rolling stone, like traveling around the world, or, you know, going from a job to a job to a job, or a house to house, whatever it is, like,
or maybe an identity or version of yourself to another, you could be in the exact same place.
Yep. Like
the chameleon.
Looking for somewhere to belong, right? Somewhere where you feel seen, heard, and that you belong. Those three basic things that all humans need for connection. The cure to loneliness is to feel seen. The cure to loneliness is to feel heard. And the cure to loneliness is to feel that you belong. And if you see yourself, if you hear yourself, and you know that you belong to yourself, nobody can take that away from you. But to do that, you have to drop the bullshit. You have to get curious about how you got to be where you are. Challenge the stories that you, Mike, you and I have talked a lot about the power of the stories that we tell ourselves. And we need to, like, kindly, lovingly, with support, because the temptation is to do this alone. And the cure to loneliness is to not do deep introspection alone.
Yeah, there is introspection, right? But we don't have to do it alone, of course.
No, and you can't do it alone.
And that's the challenge a lot of the time, as you said earlier through your story, because part of that is the fear speaks up, and then I don't want to ask for help because that means something about me, maybe something wrong with me. And so it fights against the natural element of I want to figure this all out myself, which of course is missing the point that I've been trying to do this all myself.
And so, you know, we listen to the podcasts, we read the blogs, we read the books, we watch the YouTube videos, we get inspired by TED. And then when it comes time to do something about it, we're just like, ooh, no. when we get the choice of like hard thing, safe thing.
Paying the price.
Yeah.
The asking price.
And so for me, like I now know, like deep in my core, that I belong to me. That's not to say at all that I've cured myself of my loneliness. Not at all. It's like saying something that I don't get lonely anymore is like saying I don't get happy anymore. I don't feel joy anymore. Like loneliness at its base is a human emotion. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just telling us, it's a sign within ourselves that we need connection. And so I still get lonely. Absolutely, I still feel lonely. I still want to be accepted by people. And it's deeply hurting, as you know, Mike, because we've talked about it a lot. It deeply hurts me when I put myself out into the world and get the equivalent of like, oh, that's nice. And, you know, that's, I'm like, you know, I'm putting me out in the world. I'm trying to connect with you. But one of the things that really, for people who are struggling within themselves, the idea of, you know, I can, me and my work, me being me, can trigger others. Because just like you, Mike, I now feel like connection to people. I can see through. I'm not interested in the masks. I'm not interested in the sleight of hand. I want to see how the trick worked.
Yeah.
I want to see you. I want to connect with you.
Mm.
And I've got no time for like small talk anymore. I've got no, like, I'm in Canberra, like politics rules conversation here. There's sport, there's politics, there's sex, there's like working out, there's work.
Of
Like,
course.
no time for that shit anymore. Of course, like, I could play the game, but
Mm.
if we're going to connect, like, we're going to connect,
Mm.
and I'm going to see you, and that can scare the shit out of people because
Yeah.
I've given them one less place for them to hide.
Mm.
I don't accept that bullshit that they're trying to tell themselves, and so they recoil. But the people who are in my life can, like, I like love the fact that we've connected.
Mm.
And so, yep, since coming out, which feels like, let's just say an easy statement. It's an easy statement to say rather than to do because the price is high.
Of
The
course.
price is very high. And I really do not like the price.
Mm.
Like, the relationship was fantastic.
Mm.
I was otherwise happy. I was happy enough.
Mm.
But it got to the point where hard choice, safe choice. I couldn't make the safe choices anymore without something happening to me. I couldn't say hand on heart that I belonged to me if I didn't take the hard choice.
Mm. Yeah, and we spoke about that self-abandonment, right? At some point you open your eyes to it properly and go, I can't pay that price anymore, which is abandoning myself.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
exactly.
the word that I'm, getting as well with the belonging, as you said, like you don't get to hide with anymore, is that you can try hiding, but I see. And so let me be clear that you are welcome here.
Yes.
Right. And also, let's not kid ourselves that we are going to, quote unquote, feel like we belong with everyone, because not everyone is for everyone. So you're welcome. It's just that we might find out that we're not each other's people, and that's also okay.
Yep. And that's fun. That's fun. That's because anyone, like, I've simply got no time anymore within myself to call surface level conversations connection. They're not. That's a chat. And, as uncomfortable and sometimes much as I have to sort of calm and reassure myself, like, I'm not shaking anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not shaking. I'm really, like, I did the hard thing. I've shared myself. I've been, like, authentically me. And this is like the reward. The price is high, but the reward is great. I had to work through myself and through the doubts and, like, who would want to know about this, and what's the safe way to be authentic and be vulnerable. How can it, like, and I constantly try and find the safe way of doing it, which then comes across as academic.
Yeah, and also that's a contradiction that doesn't work, right?
Exactly.
Apart from the fact that once you pay the price initially and you choose to let all the other shit drop away, it's safe then, because it's easy. It's so much easier to be authentic without having to put all the masks on and all that stuff. It's confusing, it's exhausting, it's heavy, right? So it becomes safer in the sense that it's easy, especially when you've got to find your people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And, like, for me, living that diplomatic life, my people are all around the world. I don't see them ever. I certainly can't see them now.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, like, deeply, that's sad. That's sad, but that's life. That's what the diplomatic life means. But when it comes, like, it's all well and good to say it's inspiring and stuff, but the message that I want to give to, the listener and the viewer is this: like, the connection, the path back to oneself is not to put all of that power into the hands of someone else, whether it's a husband, a wife, a partner. It's not the hands of, putting it into a podcast. It's not, into a blog or into like a community organization. They play their roles in feeling connected and not feeling lonely. But the most important part is the belonging, doing the work, making the conscious decision today, like right now, to do something for you because you know it's right for you, not because what you think society wants. Acknowledge it, pay, know that it's there, or what someone else expects you to do. But the path back to you, the path back from loneliness, each and every time you feel lonely, is to connect within yourself, know who you are, and then be who you are.
Yeah, and that is the foundation for the actual connections that are enriching and nourishing with others. Beautiful, Phil. I love it. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap this up. So please let us know, where can we find you apart from somewhere down in Canberra?
Yeah, so I'm on, there's a couple of websites. One is the lonelinessguy.com, which is my service for gay men, and then the lonelydiplomat.com, which is my work for diplomats. And I'm on Instagram, search The Lonely Diplomat, search The Loneliness Guy, and on Facebook, probably also on Twitter and I don't know, LinkedIn, and I'm struggling to think Pinterest, and I don't know, wherever all the kids hang out, that's kind of where I go to.
Now we're getting there. We'll of course make sure that we've got all those links, all the things, and absolutely is something that Phil has chatted about today. Even simply the topic of loneliness, which, as you said, is often such a big thing for us to even contemplate having a conversation about, because there is stats, there's things that you can get into, the huge cost it has on our mental health, of course, but also on our physiological and physical health as well. All those things are big, big topics, which I know you speak so beautifully on in the work that you do. Phil, thank you so much for coming, you bloody legend, onto the show.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, listeners and viewers, for having me in your life for just a few moments. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.